we've forgotten the basics of spirituality, which is that it's a communication and a conversation with God.
And I'm convinced when I was in the light, that communication, that talking with God was probably the most important. It's just a feeling you can never ever forget.
And then obviously each person's going to have that conversation in a little bit of a different way.
Where I was up there in the light, in a familiar place. I was home.
If I had my choice, I would have stayed.
I try to go around loving people today.
When you go to the other side, you understand first this: you're a great and powerful spiritual being.
It's not all over with the death of the brain and the body. Some aspect of us is divine.
Hello, I'm Joseph Campanella. All the people you've just heard from have had their lives permanently altered by visions of what lies beyond this reality. Many have been positively changed by a near-death experience. The near-death experience, or NDE as it's come to be known, is common knowledge in the 90s. And no, this program isn't simply another treatise on the near-death experience. No, we're going to take you far beyond that. An estimated 8 million Americans have had near-death experiences, and many of them tell of having had personal encounters with divine beings as a result of their brush with death. And these encounters, these conversations with God, have had amazing transformational effects on the lives of these people. But first, let's lay the groundwork. All those who have had a brush with death tell a very similar story.
People from all over the world who come close to death as a result of a cardiac arrest or other illness will report to us a common pattern of experience.
This is Dr. Raymond Moody, noted psychiatrist, lecturer, and researcher. He is perhaps best known as the author of the groundbreaking examination of the near-death experience, the best-selling book, Life After Life. It has sold upwards of 15 million copies and has been printed in 14 different languages.
They tell us, first of all, that they seem, from their point of view, to leave their physical bodies, to float up above the scene of the resuscitation, and to watch the events going on down below. They tell us that they go through a narrow passageway or a tunnel into an incredibly brilliant and warm and loving light. And they say that as they go into this light, they are met by the spirits of relatives or friends of theirs who have already died. They tell us that they may meet a being they describe as a being of light, a wise and loving presence who conducts them through a panoramic memory review in which they seem to see every single detail of their life displayed around them in full colors and 3 dimensions, and that as this progresses, they learn that the most important thing they could have done with this life they had just led is to learn how to love their fellow human beings.
Thanks to modern medicine, people are being brought back from death's door. And we're learning about these wonderful lessons of hope and love. Hamlet, in his famous To Be or Not to Be soliloquy, spoke of that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler ever returns. Of course, that undiscovered country he spoke of was death, and he feared that if he took his own life, he would fly to ills that we know not of. Well, Shakespeare had a great insight into the human condition, but in his 17th century world, he was lacking information that we have today 400 years later. Travelers do return from that undiscovered country, and we are not flying to ills we know not of. Travelers to that new land return with a new outlook on life, and the cumulative effect of this new knowledge is usually a dramatic, positive life transformation.
I think that what we can get out of near-death experiences without having to think of it in terms of a proof of a life after death is that it has enormous spiritual value. And we can see very dramatically the transformations in personality that it can bring about among people who go through something like this.
Two other authors who can attest to this are Paul Perry, co-author of 6 books on the near-death experience, and Danyan Brinkley, who suffered not just 1, but 2 brushes with death. His best-selling books are the result of these life-altering events.
You know, I think one of the most amazing things about the near-death experience is how virtually everyone who has it no longer has a fear of death. I mean, if you look at Melvin Morris's research in the transformation study, he found that almost 100% of people who almost die and have the near-death experience are no longer afraid of death.
As far as approaching death, I have no fear of dying whatsoever.
I'm not afraid to leave this world because I have been where I'm going again.
I do not look forward to the dying process. I do acknowledge the fact that it was painful and that I did get frightened. But I do know that all of that is just a passageway into this experience that I had before.
This is Diane Morrissey. Diane is a group leader for a Los Angeles chapter of IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. These are people who have visited that passageway. They meet on a monthly basis to share their experiences and help others understand the life transformational impact of an NDE.
My son was killed in a car accident, and it was a very violent death. He went off a freeway. He went down 65 feet into cement, and so the fear I had of the pain he endured, and for the hour and a half that took them to get him out of the vehicle, haunted me. It just haunted me. When I first read Life After Life with Dr. Raymond Moody, that gave me my first glimpse of life after death, and it gave me my first hope.
Quite a number of people over the years have told me that in the closing moments of their life that they were surrounded by helping presences, beings that you could characterize, I suppose, as angels.
And I belong to a group called Compassionate Friends, and we have a thing called Day of Hope. And we just had our 3rd one, and Diane was our speaker, and Grace Boboka has been a speaker.
I just wanted to tell them, do what you have to do. I'm okay, because I was out of my pain. All of that pain, all of that suffering was completely gone.
Nothing I've heard from my religious background, nothing I've read, no other things have helped but that. That was the single most significant thing that has happened. And it has transformed my entire life. And my whole outlook on life is different.
So it changed my whole life. It changed my career. It changed what I believe in. It taught me that everything we think, do, and say is extremely important, much more than we ever thought before, no matter how religious we were.
One of the most dramatic, complete, and profound life-altering near-death experiences is that of Danyan Brinkley, author of Saved by the Light. He was electrocuted when lightning struck a telephone line outside his home.
On September 17th at 7:05 p.m. in 1975, I was talking on the telephone to a friend of mine.
All right, Tommy, thanks a lot for inviting us. I have to check with Sandy, though, because you know she manages my time for me. Well, this is some storm we're having, huh? All right, well, anyway, thanks for inviting us. And
I was on fire like I had been consuming battery acid. I was burning. I didn't know what had happened to me. Then all of a sudden, it was as though I was floating. And then I rolled over and I saw my wife coming down the hall.
Oh, Danny! Oh, Danny, what happened? Oh, my God! I need some help.
I didn't know what had happened to me. I had never heard of the near-death experience. And I didn't know if I was at ground zero or what had happened. The guy who I was talking to on the other end of the phone came over immediately. He was a corpsman in the Navy, and he knew I was dead.
Call an ambulance. Okay, well, but don't leave him. Don't leave him. Okay, I'll go.
I'm watching him watch me. I'm watching him be emotional, wondering, you know, here is his friend and what's happening, and I can hear his thoughts. And I remember looking over his shoulder and looking down at myself and thinking that I thought I was a better looking guy than that.
Check his vital signs. He's gone.
Then this tunnel began to form. As this tunnel began to form, I felt more at peace than I'd ever felt. I felt comfortable and safe. I began to be pulled down this tunnel. And as I moved down it, I become so secure that I may not know exactly what's going on, but I know that this is right and natural.
But there are some who say that it's not right or natural or even real for that matter. There's one school of thought that holds the opinion that these visions are mental tricks caused by a dying, short-circuiting brain, or even that they're caused by drugs. But scientists who've devoted years to researching these experiences disagree.
For anyone to say that these near-death experiences can be explained away as the terminal events in the brain, biochemical disturbances, or wish-fulfilling fantasies, or whatever, is just as unreasonable as if someone were to come along and say that these near-death experiences prove scientifically that there is a life after death.
People, I think, are familiar with the fact that we actually have two brains. We have a right brain that controls basically the left side of our body, a left brain that controls the right side of our body.
Dr. Melvin Morse is a practicing physician and associate professor of pediatrics at the University of Washington. He has written the best-selling books Closer to the Light, which spent 3 months on the New York Times bestseller list, Transformed by the Light, and Parting Visions, all based on his interviews with child patients who have died and come back.
Deep within our brain, on the right side, right above the ear, and deep, deep, deep within the brain, is an area which allows us to communicate with, for lack of a better word, with God. And that is the part of the brain which allows us to have an inner voice, that allows us to have a sense of conscience. It's the quiet part, the nonverbal, intuitive side that every human being has.
These studies have not been taught in medical schools. They're out there for anyone to look at, and I challenge people to look at this data and assess it for themselves. And I believe that if people will look at this data, this can show positive effects of mind at a distance. And to me, this represents a friendly, benevolent side to the universe.
Dr. Larry Darcy, an internist who has studied the effect prayer has in the healing process. He is the author of Meaning in Medicine and Healing Words, The Power of Prayer in Medicine.
There are now well over 130 controlled laboratory studies testing this ability of prayer to act positively at a distance, and over half of these studies show statistical significance that when I pray for you, and I have a loving, empathic, and compassionate attitude toward you, then you change for the better.
So we see that this right temporal lobe has many functions in our body. Some viewers may not be aware that telepathy, for example, is a well-established fact, has been documented in the laboratory again and again, and is mediated by our right temporal lobe.
In one of the best human studies, we saw a cardiologist at the University of California Medical School at San Francisco perform this study in the coronary care unit at San Francisco General Hospital. Dr. Randolph Bird looked at 393 patients who either had an acute heart attack or severe chest pain. All of these people got admitted to the coronary care unit and were given state-of-the-art, high-tech coronary care. Half of these people, however, had their first names farmed out to various prayer groups in the San Francisco Bay Area, and half did not. This was what we call a double-blind study. Neither the patients nor the healthcare team, the doctors, nurses, and so on, knew who was and wasn't being prayed for. When the data were analyzed and the numbers were all assessed, It looked as if this prayed-for group had been given some sort of miracle medication.
Well, now this gives us more of a physiological explanation for telepathy, because this same area of the brain, which allows us to mediate these subtle electromagnetic forces, can then reach out at a long distance to someone else's electromagnetic field.
There were fewer deaths in the prayed-for group. The prayed-for group required fewer potent drugs, such as antibiotics and diuretics.
we can stop thinking of these things as weird or bizarre or paranormal. We understand that we're biologically equipped to have things like miracles happen to us.
I can assure you, if what was being evaluated here had not been prayer, but some sort of new medication to be used for acute heart attacks, this would have been heralded as a modern medical breakthrough, and people would probably have been lined up down the street to get their hands on this stuff.
So for the first time, we have a scientific understanding of the nature of God, and it is a miracle. And the fact that neuroscientists are starting to understand it does not devalue it in any way. It makes it more accessible. It says to people who are struggling with their own spiritual feelings and intuitions, yes, you are right. You are not just a biological machine. You're a biological machine with something extra. Something, for lack of a better word, that has a soul.
Modern science is implying that we have shared characteristics with the divine. You know, that's pretty good for me.